Well, we are live now. It's 12 noon Eastern. I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein magazine. Our guest today is going to be Scott Gellatly. Hi, Scott.
Eric, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so we're going to wait for a couple people to come on board here, wait for some folks to join in. I'm going to make some announcements, and then we're going to get back to you. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
Okay, you need to tease us. What are you going to show us or talk about today?
A little bit about my the way my plein air process has evolved over the last couple of years and how that's feeding my current studio paintings.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to wait till some folks come on board, so we'll see you in just a minute. Thank you. All right, so here we are today in the Adirondack Mountains, upstate New York. And it is a scorcher of a day, really super hot here. I went out on this boat this morning, and I took my kids, all three kids. I got them out of bed because they want to sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and got them up, and we went and did our annual canoe picture. So my dad lives across the lake. He's not here this year because of coronavirus, but we went across the lake to his place. He's got a beautiful view of the mountain. And every year since the kids were, 3 months old, 4 months old, we put them in this canoe and have taken a picture. Now, today was the 18th picture in a row. And so actually it might be 19th. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, so that I don't have it to show you because I haven't had a chance to download it yet. But I'm going to do a book for the kids. They don't know this. And I'm going to do a book that shows every canoe picture every year. I've got to find them all and put them together, and that'll be kind of a gift for them for going off to college. I don't think it'll be done before they go off to college, but maybe for Christmas. All right. Okay, so today we've got some really terrific things for you. Today is day number 138. That means we have been here for you every single day at 12 noon for 138 days in a row, starting just about a week after we went into quarantine. Took me a while to figure this out, get this started. And my goal was to give you something to think about, something to do, and to keep your mind out of the problems of coronavirus and to keep you feeling a little good about yourself. So I hope it's working. And we will continue to do this. We don't know how long we'll do it, but we're going to do it. I have shifted a lot, and last couple of weeks and for several months, really, I've been doing a lot of art marketing things, and now I'm trying something different. I'm doing interviews, and today we will be doing an interview with Scott Gellatly. I always pronounce it wrong. I'm sorry, Scott. And but today we also, each day, we've been offering a fairly extensive video sample of some of the hundreds of videos that we have produced. Today, George Gallo. George is an amazing painter, and he's a really funny guy. And you're going to watch this because he's so much fun to be around. George is also a Hollywood film writer and producer and director. Has done a number of films that you would know, working with some of the top stars who are his friends. And he did one called Local Color, which was a story about a plein air painter. And it was really the story of his life, learning how to become a plein air painter at the age of, I think, 14. And so he has studied in the, studied under, I think it's Cherepoff in the Pennsylvania Impressionist kind of style. And he's going to show you this video today, how he painted this particular scene. It's a river scene, very, the color on the video doesn't really do it justice, but it's got these really rich spring greens. I happen to own this painting. It's beautiful. And so we're going to hear from George Gallo today at 3 p.m. So you'll want to be there at 3 p.m. for that. Okay, so a couple of other things that we're talking about. First off, we are giving away a $6,000 painting by Carl Dempwolf, the great California Impressionist. He even made the frame. I think this is a 16 by 20 if I don't have it down here, but you can win this by going to paintinggiveaway.com. You have to do it sometime in the month of August because it's only for August. And if you've entered other things in the past, that won't apply to this. And we will announce the winner at the beginning of September. So make sure, and you would love to own this painting. I own a Carl Dempwolf painting, and it's so precious to me that it hangs in my office right across from my desk so I can look at it all the time. So this is something that you may want to own. I want to remind you that I have a Plein Air podcast. This comes out every single week. It's new every single week. I don't know how I managed to get it done, but I do. I'm recording another one today. And this week, I believe we have Rose Franson on. So you'll want to see that or hear that. It's all audio. I also, at the end of the podcast, I do what I call the Art Marketing Minute, where I answer your questions about art marketing. And I also have a separate podcast called the Art Marketing Minute Podcast. All right. I am really excited because in the mail, the new issue of Plein Air magazine just came out. I'm trying to hold it so it's not reflecting. And it's really hard to see that image, especially because of all the light hitting it. But that's an Albert Handel painting, and it's just gorgeous. And so anyway, this is the new issue. It's just filled with really, really beautiful articles. And so very proud of our team, our editors, for putting that together. So congratulations to Kelly Kane and Sherry Dawn Haas and everybody on the team, the art people, everybody. It's spectacular. Thank you. And if you're not a subscriber to Plein Air magazine, just know that we would love for you to be. It is the #1 selling art magazine in America. Yes, #1 selling art magazine in America at Barnes & Noble, which is the major retail who carries it. And it is, it outsells, we're in what's called the art and photography category, and it outsells all the other magazines in the category. So, I mean, not combined, but, you know, it's the #1 selling in the art and photography category. So we're really proud of that. And one thing that you will notice, I don't talk about this very much, but you notice that we really honor the images. We do not put copy on the images. There's a little tiny Streamline logo down in the corner. But, you know, a lot of magazines, you pick up most magazines, they got copy everywhere. And we try to keep it pristine. Now, there's a little copy up at the top, but we try to honor the images. And we think that's probably why it's the #1 selling art magazine, because everyone else is cluttered. And a great marketing principle is that when everybody else zigs, you should zag. So anyway, you want to pick up your copy at Barnes & Noble if you can, or better yet, get a subscription. It's $40 a year, and it's worth every penny. We think so anyway. We would be honored if you would pick one up. Okay, so another couple of things to talk about. The big enchilada is Realism Live. And Realism Live is our virtual art conference. We think we're going to break a world's record for the largest virtual art conference in history. We broke a world's record by having the very first virtual art conference in the world with Plein Air Live, which was about 3 weeks ago. And it was a phenomenon. We had about not quite double what we normally get at the Plein Air convention. And it was a huge audience. And the benefit, of course, is that you don't have to spend $3,000 by the time you get on an airplane, get a rental car, get a hotel room, you know, all the things that go with it. You can just come to this in the safety of your own home. And we've set it up so that it's interactive. And what that means is you actually get a chance to interact with other people. We have breakout rooms. We had dancing together. We dance in the mornings. We have fun. We have a cocktail party and a painting together. So this is what we're going to be doing at Realism Live. Realism Live is about realism. In other words, if you can tell what it is, it's realism. This would be abstract. Nothing wrong with abstract. It's just this particular conference is about realism. And so it is dealing with all the subjects within realism. So we have the human figure. You can have human figure in loose or human figure in tight. This is a multi-figure piece by Graydon Parrish. This is Rose Franson, one of our faculty members. Then we have the portrait. And it can be a storytelling portrait like that, or it can be something a little bit more formalized like that from Josh LaRock. We have the still life, we have the landscape, and we have flowers, and of course some other subjects as well. So this is going to be monumental. It's going to be huge, and it takes place October 21st through 24th. And we have a beginner's day on the 20th. And that way they're going to teach you the basics of how to draw a human head, or how to draw a human body, and what the proportions are. And even if you don't think you know how to do this, because most of us don't, you know, this is not about natural talent. This is about learning. Everybody can learn. And so we're going to teach you these things. And the basics day will teach you the basics of drawing a head, drawing a body, basics of landscape, basics of still life, and so on. So we're about to announce a pretty massive faculty. We've only got a few people that we have announced so far. We have Daniel Sprick. That alone would be worth the price of admission, as each of these people would. Joshua LaRock, Rose Franson, Graydon Parrish. We also have Juliet Aristides. I'm looking for her picture. And we have Daniel Gerhardt. And so a huge lineup. And Juliet is going to be teaching how to draw. Look at that drawing. I mean, she's absolutely amazing. So you want to sign up. Remember, there's an early bird price that expires on the 30th of August. So you can save $100 from each of the categories. There are 3 categories, and each of them have different levels of replays available. And some of the categories, one of the categories has a massive amount of gifts that come with it, and some other stuff. And so take a look at realismlive.com. Okay, now today I'm giving away prizes for comments, and today's prize will be a digital subscription to Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. I think I have a picture of the most recent issue. It's probably not a great picture, but that's the most recent issue of Fine Art Connoisseur. It's a painting by the famous Russian master Nikolai Blokhin. And so we're going to give away a digital subscription. And so you can win that. And of course, the digital, a lot of people get the digital and the print when they get it, because it gives them a chance to have it early, and also something they can look at, tear out. Oh no, heaven forbid. We also have a winner from yesterday. Today's winner, my book, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques for Turning Your Passion into Profit. It's an Amazon #1 bestseller, was after the first week, actually. Thank you for that. So that is going to Stacy Pope in Baldwinsville, New York. So I won't have to mail it very far, right? I could drive it there. I don't know where Baldwinsville is. And today, a reminder that we have George Gallo, Impressionistic Landscape Painting. So now what I want to do is get right to our guest. We have a fabulous guest, Scott Gellatly. Scott, welcome to whatever we call this every day, day number 138 live.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. So Scott, just for the benefit, there are people who are watching this literally all over the world. I know that Saudi Arabia is watching right now. I know that Egypt is watching. I see Norway. I see Spain. There's a lot of people watching. So even though you're world famous, tell everybody a little bit about your background.
All right. I have a degree in drawing and painting from the University of Oregon. I'm born and raised in Portland, Oregon, so stayed pretty close to home while pursuing my art degree. Worked in education right after graduating from the U of O, both teaching art to middle school students, continuing education at community college up in the Seattle area. Then spent 20 years working in the art material industry, both at the retail end and also from in the manufacturing end, working for 15 years as product manager for Gamblin Artist Colors here in Portland. And I think one of the most fulfilling aspects of being in the art material industry is just engaging with painters about the practice of painting. You know, what we do in the field and what we do in the studio, linking the materials that we use as artists with our intentions as painters, and try to, lower that distance between point A and point B, what we want to do as an artist, and what the outcome is in the studio.
Now you have had, because of your time with Gamblin, you've had a huge amount of education in the idea of creation of color and use of color and how color mixes and so on. Tell us why that's been beneficial.
Oh, geez. It kind of gives me, you know, the human eye can see some 7 or 8 million different colors. And so it gives us just absolute possibilities when we really kind of get to know our color mixing systems, our palette of colors that we work with. I've always attributed looking at a color chart, whether it's online or a printed color chart, as like looking at a family portrait of a big family reunion containing about 100 different colors or 100 different people at this family reunion, where you can tell some people look like each other, but they've got very different personalities. And that's one of the aspects that I like to talk about when talking about different pigments and different colors and how to put them to use in our work, is you get to know the different personalities of each individual pigment. Quinacridone red has a very different personality than alizarin crimson, and you know, they might occupy very similar areas around the color wheel, but how does that different personality of the pigments really inform our work and give us new possibilities in color mixing? So, you know, I feel like I am, even though I've been in this world for, you know, 20 years, I feel like I'm just cracking the surface of just tapping into the possibilities of color. But that also really kind of feeds my plein air work right now, that I'll get to in a moment. But you know, my goal going outside and painting is just observing color interactions, and it is less about matching color than it is about interpreting color. So I find that I take visual cues from nature, and I really am thinking more about personal interpretation of that color. And sometimes it's a great deal of exaggeration of the colors that I see out in the world to what I capture in paint and I bring back and work into my studio.
So the color business is really interesting, because if you go back historically and look at what they used to call the color men,
right,
back in, you know, in the old days, where the artists would go to the color men to have colors basically mixed up, they would buy raw pigment, which is powdered stone or various things. There was a period of time when there was a lot of innovation, a lot of new colors came about, the cadmium colors and so on. And yet that innovation is still going on, not as much, but you and I had a discussion, for instance, about a couple of new colors that were discovered. Can you speak to that a little bit about, you know, some of the new discoveries that are happening and whether or not they're going to make any difference to our lives?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right that there was a much closer relationship between the painter and the colorman, or the people who had really firsthand knowledge of where the pigments came from with their sourcing. And it was that color before really the 19th century was sold in dry form, where the artist or an artist apprentice would actually mix the pigment into the chosen binder right in the studio at a consistency that would be put to work right then and there. So the relationship between the painter and the color that they used was a much closer relationship than I think it is today. Fast forward 200 years, and we have basically so much color available to us through the innovations of pigment technology in the Industrial Revolution, and then through organic chemistry in the 20th century. And you've got, you know, historic names like, you know, raw umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. And it's like, yeah, those are obviously colorants that naturally come out of the earth. But then you pick up a tube of paint that's, dioxazine, quinacridone, phthalo, what the heck is that all about? So that's basically the innovations that came out of the 20th century. And like I said, they have very different personalities in their level of transparency, tinting strength, their chroma, in which they mix with white and different colors. And so when we're either online or we're at an art supply store, we walk down the row of oil paints or acrylic paints or watercolors, whatever you're painting in, and we just have so many choices to us now, and it can be, I think, equal parts inspiring with all the colors, but also there's kind of that intimidation factor that comes along with how many choices that we have at our disposal to work with. And so what I do in my recent teaching online and heading into this fall is really marry the theory of color theory with choosing a palette that supports our needs as a painter. I think one of the ways that we can create a really strong artistic voice in our work is having a really strong personal relationship to color and to our color palettes. And my color palette that works for me might not be right for another painter, and vice versa. So I think that finding that kind of color voice for each individual painter is really important. And that's where diving into the personalities of pigments becomes, I think, really important tool for learning how to use color in one's work.
There was you and I talked, there was a new color that you guys bought a small amount of pigment and made 2 or 3 tubes of paint. And I think they were several $1,000s per tube because of the cost of the pigment, but it was a new blue discovery. But from what I remember, you decided that it really wasn't going to give us anything that we couldn't already do with the existing range of blues. Was that correct?
Yeah, this was a pigment called Yinmin Blue that was discovered here in Oregon, down at Oregon State University in Corvallis, and it is a compound of yttrium, indium, and manganese that was kind of discovered by accident. But it has some novelty to it because it, mineral-based pigments, blue pigments, they don't come along very often. So there is a great amount of press around this novelty. One of the downsides, as you mentioned, is the cost. I think that the dry pigment itself was $1,000 a kilo, and a mixture of cobalt blue and ultramarine gets you pretty close to that color, as well as a slightly cleaner mixture and tint from it.
So there's also a new black, which is a black that absorbs absolutely no light and actually makes something look as if, it's a hole. And I just saw that BMW painted one of their cars with that new black, which had to be enormously expensive. So
right. Yes.
Actually it would completely disappear. It would have no light. Okay, so what do you want to talk about today?
So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot in my own work and is starting to influence my online teaching that I've been pursuing the last few months is developing a kind of a new relationship with plein air painting. I've been plein air painting since probably the mid 90s, late 90s, when I really got kind of sunk my teeth into working on site. And I've been doing it ever since, and I think it will always be part of my practice. For a number of years, I was fortunate to participate and be invited to some of the major events throughout the country, Door County, Sedona, Olmsted, really great events. And it really kind of sharpened my skills of getting out there, working directly from nature, executing a painting, not to mention the wonderful camaraderie in the plein air community. But I also am thinking about how each plein air painting kind of fits into my overall work and its relationship to my studio work. And one of the concepts that I've been thinking about as of late is, just like in composition or choosing subject matter, if everything's important, then nothing's important. And that I really want to pursue like one particular aspect of the painting, of the landscape, to work into my work. And so the last couple years, I've been focusing just on wetland imagery. Really close to my house here in Portland, I can access maybe 3 or 4 different small wetland areas. And first, I just love the interaction of color, of sky, of land, of water, all of those great aspects of landscapes that come together in very small, intimate settings. And instead of going out and executing oil paintings on site and spending about 2.5 to 3 hours on an oil painting, I've transitioned to doing really small sketchbook size paintings in kind of a combination of watercolor, gouache, casein, acrylic gouache, and that has just totally kind of re-sparked the whole plein air experience for me. And I'll just show a couple of these here. They are Strathmore size sketchbooks.
Oh, beautiful.
And I just do, I tape them off. So there's a 3/4 inch border around it. And some of these I'll do on, if I'm vacationing with the family, I'll sneak out for, 30, 45 minutes to execute these little paintings. And one is, there's a couple different aspects that I really like about this format, as opposed to executing paintings, is that I'm not thinking about these as frameable, sellable paintings at this point. This is my kind of visual journaling that I do out in the field. And so there's something that is, with the shorter time constraint, with the smaller size of these, the fact that they will always live in a sketchbook like this. I don't tear them apart. Just like you kind of had a knee-jerk reaction of tearing a page out of a magazine, I have the same with these guys. I want to keep them kind of intact. So each one becomes a little bit less precious, and I just do kind of quality out of quantity. I keep going out in the field. I keep doing these short exercises. I do them when my kids are at soccer practice or in between running errands. I pull over, do a little sketch, and I get back on my way. And I find it's a really great responsive way to work from the landscape, but it also serves as great kind of visual fodder for when I come back into the studio and work on my studio paintings. And I might choose just a little color interaction out of one of those small paintings to pursue a larger piece in the studio. And my work in the studio as of late, and I think as a response to this, has really kind of shifted back and forth between realism and abstraction. And even in the abstract qualities of some of these pieces, there's still very much a reference to the landscape, whether it's natural light, whether it's how we read spatially, what's foreground, what's background, atmospheric perspective, and what that does to color, what that does to edge. All of those are at work, even if the imagery itself is getting a bit more abstracted. So not only has this practice of working smaller and in water media out in the field kind of sparked my plein air experience, it's also kind of reinvigorated my studio work as well.
So you're using a mixed media approach. So you said watercolor, did you say gouache?
Gouache, casein, which is a milk protein-based binder for the pigment. That has a kind of a stiffer...
I don't know anything about casein. I mean, I've heard of it over the years. I've never used it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it is, it's water-soluble binder. It's got a little denser of a feel out of the tube than casein does. Or I'm sorry, than gouache does. Casein, like I mentioned, it's a milk protein-based binder. It's got a very natural quality to it. One of the other qualities that it shares with gouache is that it dries very matte. It's a bit more opaque due to the higher pigment load. But unlike watercolor or gouache, once it dries permanent. So if you go in with a really wet mark on top, it's not going, and really scrub at the painting, it's not going to lift off what was applied beforehand. So it's a bit more like, it kind of marries the qualities of a gouache and an acrylic, but to me it has a bit more kind of a natural quality to it than acrylics do. Interesting.
All right.
Yeah.
And didn't egg tempura also combine egg and milk, or was it just egg?
Mostly the fluid of the egg yolk itself, and most recipes for egg tempura would call for an emulsion with a small amount of linseed oil as well.
Okay.
So egg is kind of this really wonderful quality in that it's both accepting of oil and of water, and that's where egg tempera is.
But it dries really, really fast.
Really fast, really matte, and that's something you have to.
And you can eat it.
Oil painter, I really have to get over that hurdle of the dry time out in the field, and exercise a little portion control on the palette and whatnot. But it's the Richardson company in Wisconsin that makes their line of casein, which I think is the only real artist line of casein on the market. And it's a nice color, and it's what I like about it too, because of the denser quality. Of course, you can thin it down to get more of a thin wash-like quality with like a watercolor, but you can also use it straight and get a really nice broken mark that relates really well to oil paintings.
All right. Do you have any thoughts on color temperature, color mixing, things that might be helpful tips for folks?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that I will always do in my classes, I just finished 3 months of a course called Abstracting the Landscape through the Winslow Art Center up on Bainbridge Island, and getting ready to do a color theory for painters this spring, which is on my website. And one of the first tips I think of is whatever color palette you're using, think about that color in where each individual tube color is occupied around the color wheel. And I've got an example of this that's just out of arm's reach. So I'll grab it real quick and All right,
great. Terrific. Thank you. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I think it's fascinating. All right.
So this is one that I did just this weekend. I did a Fundamentals of Landscape Painting workshop. And so here's kind of my core color palette that I used in this class. Starting with the cool yellow, cadmium yellow light, really opaque mineral color, Indian yellow, transparent warm yellow, cadmium orange here. I put cadmium red light on here. Normally I use cadmium orange rather than cadmium red light, but then alizarin permanent, ultramarine blue, and then cobalt teal. So that basically gives me an understanding of which yellows are cool, which are warm, where's the placement around the color wheel. And by kind of plotting a palette into the color wheel like this, you immediately get to see what is your access or your limitations in color mixing within color space. If you've got really big gaps around the color wheel, say if that alizarin didn't exist and I just relied on cadmium red light and ultramarine blue, those colors are quite far away from each other. They're going to result in more muted violets closer to that neutral center of the color wheel, which is kind of what this was demonstrating right here. What I did was drew kind of a faint pencil line between the cadmium yellow light up here and the cadmium red light and mixed an orange here. And, you know, it's a decent orange, but it's not going to be as intense as a cadmium orange straight out of the tube. And that's just subtractive color mixing. That's what happens when we mix pigments together. So as this was a landscape painting course, I basically used the same principles to demonstrate the different array of greens that can be produced by the yellows and blues on my palette. So the closer those two colors are, the yellow and blue exist to each other around the color wheel, the more intense the greens are going to be. As the yellow and the blue gets further away from each other, it's going to result in more muted greens.
So the middle row of your greens were a combination of the teal and the orange?
Right. So we've got the cobalt teal and the Indian yellow to create this kind of inner row of green right here.
The three below. Okay.
Cadmium yellow light and ultramarine blue to do that second row or third row in. And, you know, that will provide, if our intention or if our scene calls for more muted, more naturalistic greens, then we can use that yellow and blue that exist farther away from each other around the color wheel and reserve for those higher chroma greens to be mixed with the teal and the cadmium yellow light.
So what is your what do you use on your palette? You're a guy that when you were working for Gamblin probably got access to all the paint you wanted. And I'm a paint junkie. I buy every new color that comes out just because I have to try it. But what do you put on your palette?
My core palette is cadmium yellow light, Indian yellow, cadmium orange, alizarin permanent, ultramarine blue, and cobalt teal. So it's a kind of a variation of a split primary palette where I would have two tube colors for every primary color. The only exception there is instead of cadmium red light, I shifted up to a cadmium orange, just because I find that when I usually want really strong oranges more so than really strong warm reds in my work. And I love the mixture between cadmium orange and the alizarin permanent. It's just gorgeous. So that's my core palette. And then I have, like you said, my pantry is pretty well stocked here in my studio. So I have a number of colors that make guest appearances in my work. Sometimes I'll switch out that alizarin for quinacridone when I want some punchier, maybe pinks and cool reds. Sometimes I'll throw in a dioxazine purple for some really nice dark values that I don't want totally black, but a really deep purple. Phthalo green, just incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. And then sometimes I'll just maybe mix, switch out my white that I use for like titanium buff, just to give a different mixture quality to all those tints that I make. Gives the painting kind of a different mood.
What kind of white do you use?
I use, I kind of go back and forth these days between titanium zinc white and the titanium white in the Gamblin 1980 line, both of which just have a beautiful texture that, is not too loose, not too stiff. It just, it's, it's kind of that Goldilocks approach. I just
What's
love
what's the difference between the two in terms of is one more intense than the other? I was out painting the other day, and I'm using I was using an underpainting white from Winsor Newton, which I like because it dries fast, but I felt like I couldn't really get that punch of intensity. And somebody that was with me said, well, maybe you need a titanium, which will give you a little bit more punch.
Right, right. And that punch really refers to opacity. You know, how much covering power does that have? And with whites, the greater the opacity, the higher the tinting strength is going to be. So the faster it influences another color. So titanium is certainly the strongest of the white pigments. Zinc white being the kind of weakest of the white pigments and most transparent. And then traditional lead white is kind of right in the middle of that spectrum. A lot of painters who use lead white like its translucency and its more moderate tinting strength. And that's where either a combination of titanium white and zinc white, or really what's ultimately a student grade white, titanium white. It's a great texture. It's got a lower tinting strength, and it really lets the color come forward rather than the white in the mixture come forward. And I like that quality.
You want to touch on painting safety? You know, you hear so much stuff. You don't know what's true, what's not true. Gloves, no gloves, barrier cream, no barrier cream, you know, ventilation, certain pigments that might be difficult or dangerous. Do you have any thoughts on all of that? You've spent your life in it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just in a nutshell, I think that, in talking about oil paint itself, because oil paint drives a lot of misconceptions out in the world. You know, first think about the oil itself. That's linseed oil. It's vegetable oil, and it's sold in health food stores. In health food, it's under the name flax oil. Linseed oil is the name when it's in the coatings industry, whether it's finishing wood furniture, or if it's in the decorative coatings industry, which is art making. But it all comes from the flax plant. And
if you buy it at the health food store, you pay a lot more for it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also can be treated a little differently, so it's not going to have the same drying qualities as buying it through an art supply store. So that's the oil in oil paint. And so the pigments that are used in all other types of paint and painting medium, those are relatively the same. And with the exception of a lead white, you want to be careful with as a pigment, mostly and in dry form, really. Once the pigment is bound in the oil binder or the acrylic binder or the gum arabic, we're not exposed to the dry pigment itself.
But if you're mixing your own powder and it's in the air, you need to be wearing goggles and a mask and gloves.
A respirator, exactly. And that's just, I would treat all pigments with respect in that way. And, whether it's even an earth color will contain some silica to it. The small particle size of any pigment is something you don't want to breathe in. So I would just treat all pigments in dry form with respect and wear a respirator when handling dry pigments. And then, there's so much has changed in the world of solvents. And, I think painters need to identify how much solvent does one really need to be working in a painting in their painting practice. And there are safer solvents out in the world that didn't exist 50 years ago, and it really has been a game changer. I think the other aspect of art making and safety is that you can't divorce personal safety with environmental safety. So maintaining good practices of, what do we do when we produce waste, and how do we use that waste back into our process? As painters maintaining a studio, we are small manufacturers. We produce products, and we are quite prolific in that. And so through any manufacturing, there's some waste that develops. And as oil painters in particular, with that slow drying rate, there's ways to put that waste back into the process. When I teach a class, I do a printmaking class here at Oregon Society of Artists in town, and there's always ink left over from the class, and I just put it all on one pallet, and I bring it home back into my studio. I thin it down, and I make little paintings with it, just so that pigment and that ink, leftover ink, gets put to use. And it's I'd rather have it turn into a painting than end up in the garbage.
Well, and you don't want to be pouring solvents down the drain and polluting the water system, or taking them out and even pouring it into the yard. It's, and impacting the groundwater. How do you deal with that?
So usually what I do is I've got, I save empty tomato sauce jars. I let contaminated solvent settle in those jars. The pigment sinks to the bottom. I pour off the clean solvent, and that works perfectly well, even if it's tainted with a little bit of color and maybe smells like marinara. It works perfectly fine for future brush cleaning. And then sometimes the pigment, I'll just dip the brush into that pigment, add a little medium to it, and use it as an underpainting color for planning out compositions in future paintings.
So a lot of people are painting. They will take a solvent like a Gamsol, and they will do a thin layer painting with that. Others are going right in with paint fresh out of the tube. Some are using a medium, like a gel medium, like the Gamsol or a Marroget, or a linseed oil based type of thing. What are your thoughts on, is there a right or wrong way from a archival perspective?
Well, as it relates to the initial marks on a painting, I prefer something really fluid, and that's just the way that I work. And I really like a fluid paint that readily flows off the end of the brush. That's how I get into my flow of painting. And I generally use a mixture of Galkit and Gamsol. It's pretty thin. It's about a 50-50 mixture. It's in a handy squirt bottle, and it's fairly lean of a mixture because of the Gamsol content. And I thin it in with my paints, and I work the initial sketch into the painting, the initial lay-in of the composition, and I pretty much paint with that mixture all the way through the process. Okay. And that makes each layer relate really well to the previous and subsequent layers. And things can start getting problematic when layering layer upon layer on a piece, when the actual makeup of each layer starts to be unrelated to another. So really thin with just solvent, a lot of medium, really thin, and going back and forth, those start to create unrelated paint layers. So you want those to be fairly homogeneous in their makeup. And sticking with one medium all the way through, really easy way to do that.
Okay. I've got some questions here. See if I can find a couple. Everybody's saying, somebody says smelling like marinara is very important. Should we wear gloves, or am I just appearing as a surgeon? I'm not sure what that means, but what do you think about gloves?
Gloves, the advantage to wearing gloves is that it makes cleanup easier.
Yeah.
So if you're painting and you have to take a quick break from painting to go do something else. If you're driving to a plein air session and you know yourself as kind of a messy painter, wearing gloves makes cleanup easier before you get in the car and track color on your steering wheel. For linseed oil and the pigment mixture, it will not penetrate healthy, unbroken skin. At the most, linseed oil could be kind of an irritant if you just bathed your hands in it for long periods of time. But I personally feel like gloves get in between me and the painting process. Painting is such a tactile experience that I personally don't wear gloves. I keep a pack of baby wipes around, and that works really well. If I get color on my hands, I simply wipe it off.
Yeah, lanolin is great for that. I wear gloves, and because I'm such a slob, and I'll look down and I have some white that has just gotten everywhere, and it's nice to peel them off. All right, well, let's see if I have any other questions here. There's so many. Let's see here. Now, what about the idea of taking a solvent, if you've got paint on your hands, and taking a solvent and putting that on your hands to clean your hands? How do you feel about that?
Soap and water works just as well.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Get some good soap and water, something, soap with a little grit to it. It works perfectly fine.
Okay. I've always heard oil cuts oil. And so can you clean with oil as well?
Well, then you still have to get the oil off,
Yeah.
So which is soap and water. So I would just cut right to that.
Okay. Let's see. Some of these are long. I'm trying to. Not really a question, just a comment. I live with well water and septic in the country. Is it a problem? It just disappeared. Over time to wash my brushes with gasoline and then put gasoline down the drain.
Doesn't sound like a great idea. One thing I would do, and I actually had this discussion with a painter in a similar situation a few years ago, is, besides just letting pigment settle, repurposing solvent in your studio practice, which is just a great, affordable, economic way to repurpose that material. If you have to wash your brushes with a little soap and water after the fact, what I recommend is getting a ceramic bowl that's just reserved for brush washing. Put just a little bit of water, a little bit of a soap, like a Master's brush soap works really well, and build up kind of a small lather with your brush at the bottom of this bowl. Of course, pigment will contaminate that water. So instead of pouring that down the drain or rinsing that off, take a paper towel, wipe it off the brush, wipe out the bowl, and repeat this process until the brush is clean. And you've got dirty paper towels that you can throw in the garbage. The water will evaporate from it, and just the pigment will remain on that paper towel. So there's no reason to dump anything down the drain. And I know acrylic systems, water-based systems are a little bit more complicated than that. And I know that Golden has some really great literature on their website about how to deal with water waste from water media. So I would check that out as well.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you, Scott. This has been really terrific. Good information. Do you have any paintings you want to show us? Anything close by?
Yeah. In addition to, I was just doing this piece right here, which is based on one of these small plein air sketches in the sketchbook. But the other thing I have within arm's reach is as I mentioned a moment ago, I've been doing this monotype class. And so I've been doing all these kind of abstracted, kind of landscape-esque monotypes as part of that process.
Nice.
And this is just a great way to, for me to just explore color interactions, design, shape in the monotype process, which is really immediate. You kind of give up a lot of control that you normally develop as a painter, and lay down color and see what happens. So I'm enjoying this transition between my monotype work and my studio practice.
Can you explain what monotype is?
Yeah, monotype is simply using a oil or water-based printmaking ink, which has quite a bit of tack to it. Painting on a non-absorbent flat surface like plexiglass or a thin metal panel like aluminum or copper, and then laying down a piece of paper and running it through a printmaking press, which transfers that color from the non-absorbent plate onto the paper. So you can keep working that plate, keep running it through on the same print, but you're only left with one unique image, hence the term monotype. So whereas other printmaking processes like wood blocks or linoleum blocks or etchings, lithography, you can do a whole series of similar images. With monotype, you just get the one unique image. So it's a really painterly approach to printmaking, and that's why I like it kind of feeding more visual information to feed into my studio pieces.
Yeah. So is your camera movable? Can you show us your studio?
I will show you the clean corner of my studio.
Oh, okay.
So there's a few more recent pieces. A big table with all my tools. I've got on the far side there kind of a big monotype, kind of abstracted monotype, another more abstracted oil painting there. The piece that I'm currently working on. And then over here I've got
Scott, we can't hear you when you're not in front of the camera, so get a little closer, right? Piece you're working on.
So here I've got my my palette set up here. All sorts of goodies up on the shelves there to paint with. And I love just putting up small sketches. Some of these are
Can you get a little closer to the microphone? We can't hear you.
Yeah. So these are generally demos that I do in my online classes. There's a framed plein air piece up there. Some of the sketches that I do from other works out in the field. They're really just about composition and color interactions. I wouldn't really consider these finished pieces, but it's a great way to kind of influence whatever's on the easel. And here's just a few more, and beyond that is basically my backyard.
Well, this has been fabulous. So your website is scottgellatly.com. Did I spell it right?
Yeah, absolutely. That looks right.
Okay, and do you have any paintings for sale on there?
I do. I've got a whole painting suite that each painting will say like where it's available through a gallery and which gallery, and it's all hyperlinked as to what's available. I do have a studio sale page of some slightly older plein air works, but also, and then I've got a page full of my monotypes, so you can see how those relate to my studio works. And then I've got a page of all my upcoming workshops as well. So in-person classes, as well as online workshops. And that's constantly updating as I'm adding more workshops to my schedule.
Terrific. Well, Scott, this has been terrific today. Thank you so much for being on and for doing it on such short notice. You've done a great job for us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to talk to you. It's an honor.
Yeah, we'll see you out there somewhere if we're ever allowed.
That sounds good. Can't wait to get out.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Scott Gellatly. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I think it was fabulous. I just looked up and I noticed there's a spider right on top of my camera. Yikes. So a couple of reminders. We have a $6,000 Carl Dempel painting that we're giving away at paintinggiveaway.com in the month of August. Remember, in the month of August, the 30th, we see a price increase on Realism Live. So the early bird pricing will expire soon. We're now at about 700 people signed up so far. We're trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest number of people on a virtual art conference, but also the largest number of people painting together. Now we already we haven't actually filed it with Guinness yet, but we already have the largest number of people painting virtually on the Plein Live event. So hopefully we'll be able to do that as well. You can follow me, Eric Rhoads, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And remember, we're giving away a digital subscription to Fine Art Connoisseur. To make sure you leave comments and try to tell us where you are. And last but not least, remember that we have George Gallo at 3 o'clock, Impressionistic Landscape Painting, on Facebook, on YouTube, at Streamline Art Video, not necessarily on the channel you're watching on, but it might be. It just depends, because we're on a bunch of channels right now. Again, thanks to Scott Gellatly for being on today's show. Today is day number 138. It's going to get a little interesting this week because I'll be heading out of the lake and back to civilization to get my kids into college. If you want to read the story about that, I have a blog that I do every Sunday morning. It's called Sunday Coffee with Eric, and it is coffeewitheric.com. There it is, coffeewitheric.com. So you can go there and sign up to get it for free if you want it. All right. And thank you guys for watching today. And I will see you tomorrow on day number 139. Have a terrific day. And thank you again to Scott Gellatly. Bye-bye.